Whatever his defects as a human being, and they were clearly apparent to all those who tried to befriend him, Rousseau was a genius, one of the most original minds of any age, and a writer of incomparable prose. His solitary and suspicious character had this advantage, that it made him an outsider. He didn't care what he said. As a result, he was persecuted. For half his life, he was hounded out of one country after another. In 1765, he seemed safely established in a small principality, Motier, but the local parson stirred up the people against him, and they stoned him. They broke his windows. He took refuge on this island in the Lake of Bienne. And there he had an experience so intense that one could almost say it caused a revolution in human feeling. In listening to the flux and reflux of these waves, he tells us, he became completely at one with nature. He lost all consciousness of an independent self, all painful memories of the past or anxieties about the future, everything except the sense of being. I realized, he said, that our existence is nothing but a succession of moments perceived through the senses. I feel, therefore I am. A curious discovery to have been made in the middle of the Age of Reason, but a few years earlier the Scottish philosopher Hume had reached the same conclusion by logical means. It was an intellectual time bomb which, after sizzling away for almost 200 years, has only just gone off, whether to the advantage of civilization now seems rather doubtful. It had a certain effect in the 18th century and became part of the new cult of sensibility. But no one seems to have realized how far abandonment to sensation might take us, or what a questionable divinity nature might prove to be. No one except the Marquis de Sade, who saw through the new god or goddess from the start. Nature averse to crime, he said. I tell you that nature lives and breathes by it, hungers at all her pores for bloodshed, yearns with all her heart for the furtherance of cruelty. Well, the Marquis was what used to be called a rank outsider, and his unfavourable view of nature is hardly mentioned in the 18th century. On the contrary, Rousseau's belief in the beauty and innocence of nature was extended from plants and trees and so forth to man. He believed that natural man was virtuous. It was partly a survival of the old myth of the Golden Age, partly a feeling of shame at the corruption of European society. But Rousseau gave it a theoretical basis in a work entitled A Discourse on the Origin of Inequality Among Men. He sent a copy to Voltaire, who replied in a letter which is a famous example of Voltairean wit. No one, he said, has ever used so much intelligence to persuade us to be stupid. After reading your book, one feels one ought to walk on all fours. Unfortunately, during the last 60 years, I have lost the habit. It was a dialectical triumph, but no more, because belief in the superiority of natural man became one of the motive powers of the next half-century. And less than 20 years after Rousseau had propounded his theory, it seemed to have been confirmed by fact. The French explorer Bougainville discovered Tahiti, and 2 years later, Captain Cook stayed there for 4 months in order to observe the transit of Venus. Well, Bougainville was a student of Rousseau, and it isn't surprising that he should have found in the Tahitians all the qualities of the noble savage. But Captain Cook was a hard-headed Yorkshireman, and even he couldn't help comparing the happy and harmonious life that he had discovered in Tahiti with the squalor and brutality of Europe. And soon, the brightest wits of Paris and London were beginning to ask whether the word civilization was not more appropriate to the uncorrupted islanders of the South Seas than to the exceptionally corrupt society of 18th century Europe. You may remember that some such idea was put to Dr. Johnson by a gentleman who expatiated to him on the happiness of savage life. "Do not allow yourself to be imposed on by such gross absurdity," said Dr. Johnson. "It is sad stuff. If a bull could speak, he might as well exclaim, "Here am I, with this cow and this grass. What being can enjoy greater felicity?" Well, without going as far as Dr. Johnson, who had momentarily forgotten the attribute of soul, the student of European civilization may observe that Polynesia produced no Dante, Michelangelo, Shakespeare, Newton, Goethe, what have you. And although we may all agree that the impact of European civilization on places like Tahiti was disastrous, we must also allow that the very fragility of those Arcadian societies, the speed and completeness with which they collapsed on the peaceful appearance of a few British sailors, followed by a handful of missionaries, shows that they were not civilizations in the sense of that word which I have been using.